Towson Baltimore is one of those things that I sit around and wait for these days, and certainly when Jeremy Maclin came to town last week after the release by the Kansas City Chiefs, we were sort of waiting around a little bit on Thursday, waiting around a little bit on Friday. He sort of escaped Owings Mills, but Luke was on the scene on Monday afternoon when Jeremy Maclin decided to become a Baltimore Raven. Luke, this is a very, very fortuitous turn of events for the Ravens after a couple of bad weeks and you playing the black hat of sending ugly WNST text about injuries to Tavon Young and then Dennis Pitta. Now, we got some good news here, and I guess for the mini camp this week, a little extra pep in the step, right?
Yeah, definitely a good timing with this signing. As you pointed out, when Jeremy Maclin left the facility last Friday, typically when a player visits and leaves, you don't always feel so great about that. Now, granted, it's not as though he immediately signed with anyone else, but it's well documented. The Ravens didn't let Steve Smith leave a few years ago, and he signed. Same thing with Mike Wallace a year ago, and you thought, or Ravens fans hoped that they would follow that same script with Maclin, but he basically said, well, let's give it a little time to think it over, and sure enough, he thought it over, and he chose the Ravens over the Buffalo Bills, and even some reports out there that the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that drafted him back in 2009, made a late push, maybe not a serious push, but made some sort of push to re-sign him, and he chooses the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously good news after the last couple weeks. As you pointed out, nothing but bad news, really. And after an entire offseason of waiting for the Ravens to add a wide receiver, they do it. Now, I don't think Jeremy Maclin's a miracle worker that cures all problems that they potentially have on their offense. I mean, I think we still look at the offensive line. You still look at the tight end position where there's a lot of baggage, even if there is a lot of inventory. But at the same time, this is a guy who is only 1 year removed from a 1,000-yard season and had a 1,300-yard season in 2014. 29, right around the age Anquan Bolden was when the Ravens acquired him 6-7 years ago. So I think you look at this move, and now you feel much better about the top wide receiver trio of Maclin, Mike Wallace, and Brashad Perriman. I still think they're looking for Brashad Perriman to pop this year, and if he doesn't, you probably look at their wide receiver core and say, well, it's okay, but it's not going to be anything special, probably. But if Brashad Perriman takes that step forward, and assuming Mike Wallace plays like he did last year, or at least close to it, and now you add Jeremy Maclin to the mix, and if he can stay healthy after coming off of an injury-riddled 2016 in Kansas City, then you don't necessarily have the best wide receiver group in the NFL, but that group's looking much, much better than it did even just a few days ago.
Well, it remains to be seen where the ball's going to go and who's going to be out there and all of the parts that we're going to be looking at the next couple of days. But I can't think of an acquisition, maybe short of Bolden, and I was actually weirdly in Arizona at spring training and the NFL owners' meetings the weekend that Bolden was acquired. I know that was way further back into the spring, but sort of a late addition. I don't remember the Ravens pulling anything out like this in June, right? Especially something that I think the fans sort of clamored for months and months and months. This was, I guess the stars sort of aligned here, and there was cap space, and they made it work, and, all that part of this, but it really is kind of unprecedented at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's for it to be this late in the offseason to have this kind of a high-profile move, it's pretty rare. Bolden, that went down in March. I mean, that was similar to a free agent acquisition, at least in terms of the timing. The one that comes to mind for me, maybe Steve McNair being traded from the Titans to the Ravens. That was in early to mid-June, because remember, that was
he got thrown out of camp, right? They locked him out of the minicamp, right?
June 1st kind of situation there that ended up being a trade, and so, I think you look at the timing of this, it's definitely unique. They've had some other good acquisitions this time of year. Darryl Smith comes to mind more recently, but no one this high profile really at this stage in the off season in quite some time. I mean, you have to go back quite a while. I mean, they've had some other. Bryant McKinney was acquired in training camp, late training camp 2011. So they've had some, but when you look at this being the kind of need it was. And as I noted, we've talked about this a lot. 2013, this team went into the season undermanned at wide receiver, and it bit them. Same thing happened in 2015. Good to see the Ravens recognize that, look, we can like our young guys as much as we want, but if this team's going to get to where it needs to be offensively, really tough to imagine it with just one firmly established veteran in Mike Wallace at the wide receiver position. So now they have two. Jeremy Maclin, he's not, this isn't a six-time Pro Bowl receiver coming in here, but this is a guy who's had a couple 1,000-yard seasons, a guy who, when healthy, and I will emphasize that because he has been banged up a good bit over the course of his career, but when healthy, he's a very capable wide receiver. And I think the thing you like about him, he came into the league years ago as more of a vertical threat, a guy that not necessarily exactly what we talk about Brashad Perriman hoping to be, but along those lines.
Maybe along the lines of a Torrey Smith.
Yeah, more like that. But to his credit, Maclin over the last few years, as he's gotten deeper into his career, he's become a little bit more of a refined route runner, a guy that's lined up in the slot even and had some effectiveness there. So I don't think the Ravens are going to be looking at Maclin as a guy that they're going to throw a ton of deep balls to, although he's certainly capable of doing that. But I think they're looking at him as someone who can be a little more expansive within the route tree than looking at Wallace or Perriman, and they need that. They need someone that's going to work that intermediate portion of the field. So this is going to be a unique opportunity for him. In Kansas City, he became more of an intermediate guy, really because Alex Smith couldn't throw the deep ball. And now it's not as though the Ravens can't throw the deep ball. Joe Flacco has as strong of an arm as anyone, but just because of what they need and the other vertical threats that they have, it will be interesting to see how Jeremy Maclin's role evolves here. He's going to be on the field. I think at this point it's hard not to view him as your de facto number one receiver, but how that all works out as far as what routes he's running, what kind of role he plays, that's going to be interesting to watch because they do need that that short to intermediate guy a little bit more than someone just another receiver to stretch the field. So he's someone who I think the Ravens are hoping can do it all for them in their passing game.
It is amazing with the wide receiver position, maybe more so than any other position I can think of in sports, that there have been wide receivers signed for big money in a lot of places. Mike Wallace is one of them, right? Who went down to Miami, went to Minnesota, couldn't figure it out. We've seen, in the modern era, going back to Alvin Harper leaving the Cowboys and disappearing, that, it doesn't always translate offense to offense and player to player. But I know one thing that the Ravens over 22 years have really struggled doing: figuring out how to get Travis Taylor to play, figuring out how to get Mark Clayton to play, figuring out how to get Brashad Perriman to play. And, the young wide receiver thing, I'm much, much happier with a veteran guy who has done it before and who has some level of professionalism about him, knows route running, has played at this level, knows what it's like to see a top flight defensive backs in the league. So getting a veteran guy, I don't know that there's anything else the Ravens could do to instill some confidence, because there's no level of DeVar Darlings or Clarence Moores out there that I think that anyone's going to feel real comfortable about.
Yeah. Right now, ask yourself the question, who's more likely to have a 1,000-yard season, Jeremy Maclin or Brashad Perriman? Now, that's not to say that Perriman won't be able to do that.
Or Jeremy Maclin, or someone they would have drafted in the second or the third round instead of picking up a defensive player, which everyone goes nuts on the draft. But I think the Ravens are a little worn out on drafting wide receivers and bringing in 21 and 22-year-old kids and trying to have them figure it out soon enough for them to be effective before their third or fourth year. And then you find out it's time for them to go,
Sure. And that's still a problem. But
it's a league-wide problem, though. It's not just a Ravens problem.
Well, no, I don't know about that. There are lots of teams that find wide receivers and develop them. The Ravens haven't done that. But my point being, if you at least recognize that you have a weakness, and that's clearly been a weakness for them, then adjust. And, to their credit, and this, as much as I've beaten them up about their lack of being able to draft and develop wide receivers, with Torrey Smith kind of being the lone exception here in any semblance of recent history, they've been able to find veteran wide receivers that have been past their prime, but still having something left in the tank. And I think Jeremy Maclin probably at age 29 fits into that equation, fits that description pretty well. I mean, he's not Steve Smith at the very end of his career, but he's someone that probably aren't going to expect him to have a 1,300-yard season like he did 3 years ago. But I think if you're the Ravens, it's clear that they can't just look at their young receivers and say, okay, well, if this guy pops, they haven't had that in the history of their franchise for whatever reason. And it's not to say that they should stop drafting wide receivers altogether. I think you don't get better at something unless you get off the sideline. But in the meantime, given where they are, given the need that they had, given the fact that you didn't see enough from Brashad Perriman to just hand him a starting role and just forget about it, that I think Jeremy Maclin made a lot of sense. Keep in mind, this is a guy coming off of a 536-yard season. I mean, he did not have a great year, and as much as you pointed out about these big wide receiver contracts that didn't work out, well, the Kansas City Chiefs gave him a $55 million contract, and they got 1,000-yard season out of him. And then,
well, that being said, the Ravens have never done that either.
Sure.
Gone out into the marketplace and signed that kind of guy for that reason. I mean, they're a bust at a big number, and there are a lot of busts as a high draft pick. So, sort of like quarterbacks, I guess, to some degree. You can ask Brock Osweiler about that. But, the best laid plans are this sort of thing. He was thrown out. It didn't come particularly expensively, and I think this is going to work out great, quite frankly. I feel a lot better about the football team today than I did yesterday, that's for sure.
Well, sure. I mean, this was clearly one of their biggest needs. I mean, I don't think, as I said, I don't think Jeremy Maclin's a savior. I don't think he is, if he is their number one receiver, I don't think he's a top 5 or probably not a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL, but he's somewhere on the cusp of that, if healthy, if someone who's going to be on the field for 16 games. You hope he's completely over the groin issue that cost him 4 games last year, really cost him his explosiveness for a good portion of the season. But he's certainly someone that, on paper, makes this team a lot better. And I think now you just, as far as the offense goes, you point to the offensive line and say, okay. And I know that Adam Schefter reported that Eric Decker's still a possibility for this football team. I don't see it. I don't see it in terms of fit. As much as Brashad Perriman has a lot to prove, I'm not sure he's able to really prove that if he's a number 4 wide receiver. And more importantly, I don't think they have the cap space, given the fact that right now they've been rotating 3 individuals, John Urschel, Ryan Jensen, and Matt Skura at center. They've had James Hurst at right tackle. I think you have to, between now and the start of the season, I think you have to come away with another veteran offensive lineman that can be a starter at one of those positions. And then maybe the other spot, you kind of just patchwork. And, look, you're not going to have great all-star kind of players at every position with the salary cap. But I think that's the next position you look at, or the next area that you look at on this football team and say, okay, that needs to get a little bit better. If they're not going to find a starting center and a right tackle out on the market, can you find one of those guys to at least stabilize another position, and then you feel even better about this offense? But you can't do that. You can only make each move that's presented to you at any given time. And as far as what the Ravens were able to do and having this opportunity, sure beats going into the season not having someone like Jeremy Maclin lining up at wide receiver.
So for veteran reps this week, we're talking about Yanda, C.J. Mosley, maybe Suggs, maybe not. Seeing guys get in and move around a little bit at some of these other positions, this is a nice opportunity for some of the younger players, I think, this week specifically out there in the heat.
Yeah, it is. And some of these positions where they are going to have some players out, like tight end, we don't expect to see Ben Watson, don't expect to see Max Williams. Darren Waller's been a little bit banged up this spring. Crockett Gilmore left the field last week, although they have him on the podium schedule for talking to the media, so would assume he's okay. But, that leaves a ton of opportunities for someone like Nick Boyle, who has shown some nice things on the field, but the issue has been being on the field with 2 PED suspensions in his first 2 seasons. So But someone like him, great opportunity. These offensive linemen that I mentioned, great opportunity for them. Until they bring in a veteran offensive lineman, these young guys have a chance to show that they can stick. Now, difficult, I think, to really truly evaluate offensive line play in this kind of a setting because it's non-contact, but you just kind of go down the list. We've talked about slot corner now with Tavon Young out. Guys like Maurice Kennedy have a chance to show that they can do the job, even though the Ravens brought in a Brandon Boykin with some slot experience at the cornerback position. So you're always looking for younger guys to emerge. You always with the reminder that they're practicing in shorts, and you know that mini camp and OTAs are a far different animal than even training camp, let alone talking about the preseason or the regular season. But as far as where they are in the evaluation process, I mean, there are a number of young individuals who have a chance to make their mark. And on the defensive side of the ball, in addition to slot corner, we've talked about it before. We'll continue to talk about it. This is a revamped defensive line with Brandon Williams getting the big money and anchoring the nose tackle position. Lots of opportunities for guys like Carl Davis and Michael Pierce and Brent Urban and Bronson Kafusi and Chris Wormley. I mean, somewhat of that group, they need a couple guys to emerge to replace Timmy Jernigan and Lawrence Guy, who were a big part of what they did up front over the last couple years. So lots of opportunities, lots of jobs to be won, and definitely going to be interesting to watch, not just this week, but certainly when we get into training camp in about 6 weeks or so.
He is Luke Jones. He will be on the scene for all things Purple all week long out at Ravens minicamp as the Ravens go out there. Couldn't have been like 72 and comfortable this week or anything, right? I mean, they had to turn the fryer up on Harbaugh this week, right?
Well, Harbaugh always says iron sharpens iron. So yeah, they're going to get a nice preview of what Owings Mills can be like in late July and the middle of August. So I'm sure, and one reason why they're working so early in the day, the first couple of days of minicamp, presumably because of the heat, as they're getting on the field 9 a.m. the first couple of days of training camp. So definitely going to be it's going to be sweltering. Definitely want to be drinking plenty of fluids and bringing that sunscreen to Owings Mills, not just for players but reporters alike.
We're going to hear the crack of the helmets and the thud and the ball and the sound and the whistles and the screams and the yells and the cheers and all of that stuff. And it really does happen a little strangely these days on the backfields where fans aren't going to have any access to any of this summer, which I think for some fans they're still in a little bit the fallout of Westminster and all of that. This year it's closed down totally. I don't think people have a real understanding of how ripped up their facility is right now.
It really is. Now, I mean, they've redone the cafeteria, their locker room's redone. So as far as the players themselves, they're not going to be facing it's not as though they're going to be suddenly in trailers and tight working confines and all that. But definitely, you look at the building, lots of construction going on. They have the media kind of secluded away from it all in a little trailer, which, is fine. I mean, certainly Steve Bisciotti, who, when they built this facility back in 2004, they viewed it as a game changer, not just for the players they had and for their football operations, but trying to attract, trying to grow their business, not just from a football standpoint, from a business standpoint. And they've done that, and it got to a point where the building kind of outgrew what they needed, so they're adding on. It's a lucrative project that'll be done sometime next year, from what I understand. And in the meantime, unfortunately, no fans out there for training camp. But the good news is expanding the parking lot, expanding the facilities. They've talked about being able to expand the number of fans that they're going to be able to hold in the future. They're never going to recreate Westminster. I mean, there just aren't. It was a different time. It was very much a fun experience going to McDaniel and watching the Ravens practice. To their credit, they've tried to accommodate as many fans as they could at the facility, and this summer they're going to have 3 open practices. They're going back to the Naval Academy for the first time in a few years. Going to have 2 at the stadium downtown. So they're never going to be able to fully replicate what they had years ago, but taking some steps to be able to expand and welcome more people in Owings Mills. So this year, the one-year hit where they're not going to have anyone out there other than probably some sponsorship groups and a few other groups here and there. But overall, doing some things to expand and make an already impressive training facility that much better.
It's kind of quiet, though, right now, right?
Well, it's actually loud because of the construction. But as far as people, yeah, because I know even some of their people, on the business ops side, marketing, that kind of stuff, they've had actually going downtown to work at the stadium, from what I understand. So a little bit.
Well, there is no space. Where else are you going to put them? Those buildings are literally gone.
Yeah, kind of the PR side, the media room, all of that is gone. I mean, about half the building's still functioning normally, and like I said, they've already finished the cafeteria. They've already finished the players' locker room. So those guys are basically kind of back to normal from that regard. But yeah, still a lot of work to be done, and going to make for a different summer. I mean, fans don't come out to mandatory minicamp, so no different this week really, but certainly as we get into late July and into training camp mode, it'll be a little different not having fans out there. I guess similar to what they had the first year or two when they first started holding training camp at their facility.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter. If there's any breaking news, we hope there's none out of Owings Mills this week, you will get it from him first. He's also Luke at WNST.net if you need him. We're monitoring the Orioles as well as the Ravens all week long, and the new addition of Jeremy Maclin. And, of course, the NBA Finals now done, the NHL Finals now done. Maybe some folks can concentrate on golf this weekend or waiting on Wimbledon. I don't know. But you can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We come in crystal clear from anywhere you are. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Last but never least, that breaking news is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard and our WNST Tech Service. Dennis will be here on Thursday. He's excited about minicamp. I'm excited about minicamp as long as no one gets injured. It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt, right? Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook. And don't forget the Peter Principles Chapter 5 coming later this week. You'll want to check that out online. I've now released 7 chapters of the Peter Principles, and the latest will be Chapter 5. I released Chapter 11 and 12 early. So all of that stuff's up there. If you want to read about the life and times and the biography of Peter G. Angelos, you can do that out there. Nasty at WNST.net is the way to find me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.